Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. This is Crossroads. It is a long-time project of Interfaith Alliance of Iowa. We've been doing this for many years. And really, Crossroads is about civil dialogue on important issues in our communities and in our nation. And so we're really glad to have you here. If you are new, we especially send you a warm welcome. And we're glad that you're here, and we hope that you will return. I usually tell you at the end who our next speakers are, but I'm going to tell you at the beginning just in case you have to leave. So in January, and Crossroads is always the third Friday of the month, but in January we're going to have Mike Owen, who is the Deputy Director of Common Good Iowa. And that name may not be familiar to you, but Mike Owen is one of the smartest people I know, and especially around taxes and numbers and those kind of things. He's going to talk about the tax cuts that have already happened in Iowa and also proposed tax cuts by the governor. This will be the Friday, the 19th. So not the Friday of the first week of session, but the next Friday. So it'll be very timely for you all to learn not only about the tax cuts, but the impact on Iowans. It's an important conversation in our state. So I welcome you to return on January 19th for that. But today, we are delighted to have three really talented, longtime journalists in the state of Iowa, and some of the most respected journalists in Iowa. And I don't say that just to snow you or anything. Truly, I believe that, and very glad to have each of them here. And we're going to talk about the importance of a free press. Our panelists will share why a free press matters in our democracy and the challenges they are facing today. Not that there are any challenges, right? So, we have with us Carol Hunter, who you all know as the executive editor of the Des Moines Register. Erin Murphy in the middle, who is the Des Moines bureau chief of the Cedar Rapids Gazette. And Erin also serves as the president of the Iowa Capitol Press Association. And then Ty Rushing is the senior editor of Iowa Starting Line, an online forum. And is also co-founder and president of Iowa Association of Black Journalists. And so I'm going to turn it over to, you're going to use that microphone, Carol. I'm going to turn it over to Carol Hunter. They're going to each speak for 5 to 7 minutes each, and then we do questions and answers, and I will bring the microphone around to you all at that point. So, Carol, thank you all.
Well, good afternoon. I'm going to start with just some general remarks about why legacy,
This way, maybe?
This way.
Like turn into, yeah.
why legacy newspapers have become so threatened. Really, this is something that's been happening about 15 years. The first big layoff at the Register was in 2009. And it's about disruption of the long-time business model that really sustained newspapers for so long. I do see this as a major threat because I see community publishers and local journalism as a real bedrock foundation of our democracy. And, having that local reporter at the city council and the school board and seeing what the police department is doing is an important watchdog. But it's also just part of the community fabric, knowing that the local school is putting on a play, or that the high school team is doing well, or that a local business is expanding. It all helps reinforce community. And across the state of Iowa, many local weekly newspapers that have been part of that small town fabric of life for so many decades have either folded or more likely been consolidated. So it's not just the weekly newspaper that covers one city, but a weekly newspaper still only may have one reporter, but they're covering 5 cities or 6 cities, all in a region. And so they can't get to that city council or the school board nearly so often. So basically, newspapers were built on a mass model of media. And that mass model meant a mass audience for subscriptions, but also advertisers. And advertising back in the heyday was about 3/4 of the revenue of any newspaper. Subscriptions were about 1/4. And when you think about what newspapers used to look like, those big display ads from Yonkers on Sunday and Sears and JCPenney's, well, those ads have gone the way of many of those brick and mortar stores as online shopping patterns have so changed. So the result of that is, with that much less revenue, there has been substantial cuts in news staff. I came to the Register about 19 years ago now, and our staff is about less than 1/3 the size, our news staff, as it was when I came 19 years ago. That means you can just do far less coverage. I'm still very, very proud of the coverage that the Register does, especially of, say, like the state legislature, but there are whole layers of community coverage that we just do not do anymore. So this has been driven a lot by how people access their news. You know, most people are getting their news off a cell phone these days, and it can be a wonderful thing. You know, the fact that you can access the New York Times through your phone's a pretty wonderful thing, but also so much else of daily life, accessing, you know, what is going on at the local playhouse. They're reaching out to you by email personally. So there are whole swaths of things that newspapers used to do that are being done in other ways. So you have the business model disruption and different audience preferences. But I would also say the other main challenge I see to media today is the growing tribalism of society. How people are in their own corners and tend to get their news then from outlets that they align with their own beliefs. It's sort of a natural thing, birds of a feather. But as that happens, often I think it becomes self-reinforcing. So people start hearing and seeing only news that aligns with their point of view. And that I also think can be dangerous, especially if it's an outlet that makes a practice of sort of othering people. And so that it's not just that you disagree with those people, but they're really misguided and they're the other. Now, many of the new, more ideologically leaning outlets do very fine work. I mean, Ty works for Iowa Starting Line. It comes at things from a point of view. I very much respect Ty and the other journalists at Iowa Starting Line because they do journalism. They just come at it from a viewpoint instead of trying to be, at least in the news columns, objectively. But when you think about it, I doubt that too many people who get Fox News as their main source of national news probably also subscribe and regularly read Iowa Starting Line. It's just how society has changed. And with that becomes this just distrust of mainstream media that's really very troubling and hard to understand and hard for someone like me to deal with, who has based their career on trying to seek out the truth. So that's a pretty bleak picture. Is there hope? I do think so, for a number of reasons. I do think that the subscription model can really help newspapers help find their footing. The New York Times certainly has had great success with that. Washington Post is still having some financial trouble. I think the Register has this kind of scale that between the subscription model and digital marketing services that our advertising department still does, I think we have found our footing. There will be other ways where we try to diversify revenue. Things like RAGBRAI It's a wonderful thing for partying and for exercise, but it also is a revenue maker for the Register. Things like our Des Moines Storytellers Project, we also sell tickets to that. Doesn't make a lot of money, but it brings in a little bit. You'll also see things like the fact that we have 14 different newsletters. And again, those new newsletters, if you're a Hawkeyes fan or a Cyclones fan, or what you want to do for this weekend, we can tailor those newsletters to audiences. And again, they bring in a little bit of revenue. I also think we need to be nimble ourselves about using digital technology in new ways. So I'll leave it with that. I'm very bullish about the future of the Register. It might not be on that paper delivered to your door as often down the road. Already it's really 6 days a week instead of 7. I think the Register is going to be around for a long time. And I even think the print project will be around for a long time. But I do have more concern about kind of maintaining the size of the news staff, and also about those smaller publishers across the state of Iowa. Erin?
So before we came up here, we were talking about how we were going to get this started, and Carol volunteered to go first, and I'm regretting that now because she just took everything that I could have possibly said. She did such a great job. I don't know what's left to add. I co-sign everything and just replace Gazette with the Register in the appropriate spots. So I will underscore, though, I'm glad she mentioned the local news stuff here, because you might look at us and think about the coverage that we do of elections and politics and even the State House, and man, she's so right that those local papers, those community papers, are so critical to a functioning democracy as well. So if I can encourage you to leave today with one action item, it's subscribe to your local paper and encourage your friends and neighbors to do the same, because exactly what she said, and Ty and I have been in those positions. We've reported for those kinds of papers. We've sat in those council meetings. That stuff absolutely is vital. The other thing that I'll maybe just add is we talk about press freedom. One of the things that concerns me, and this has especially come to my plate as a president of the Capitol Press Association, is it seems to be that we're on a unsettling trend of access to some of our government officials, and that worries me. And it's not because Erin Murphy of Ankeny, Iowa, does not care whether he gets to sit down with the governor or the House Speaker or the Senate Majority Leader. If I've got one less thing to put on my books that week, that's great. I'm sure I can find something else to do. Erin Murphy, the Des Moines bureau chief for the Gazette, is very concerned about that, because the less you're able to put those leaders, those officials, those candidates, in front of reporters, whether individually or as groups, the less of an insight people get into what's happening with their government. The less insight people get into elections and the candidates and who they're supposed to be deciding among. So I'm worried about that trend, and that's not a partisan statement. I will happily tell anyone how amazing Governor Terry Branstad was as far as media access went. He was constantly holding press conferences, and even if you found him in public, he would stop and take a question, even if it wasn't on his schedule. I can list examples, positive and negative, of all political stripes. It very much is, coming from the standpoint of, those are the people that should be accountable to the people, and not just in elections all the time. And the best way to do that is to have them in front of the media, and so we can pass along that information to all of you. So that's another thing that obviously I'm constantly aware of and watching and concerned about. I hope it's a short-term trend and it reverses itself. But again, it is also the kind of thing that doesn't change until they hear from the people that are important to them. And there's two classes of those. There's the people who fund their campaigns and there's the people who vote for them. So if you're ever talking to your local representative, please encourage them to be accessible to the media. Like I said, I hope it's something that we're just seeing in the short term, and will kind of course correct itself. But I worry about that direction that we're headed. That's really all I could add.
Man, Carol took all the good stuff. So a lot of you know me from Iowa Starting Line, but yeah, as they both noted, my roots go into community journalism. I started in Newton, I went to Sheldon, went to Sioux City, then went back to Sheldon, where I got my first editing job. And like, the cool part about community journalism is you see how much the people in those communities love their local newspaper. If they didn't get their Sioux City Journal on their doorstep at 9 a.m. on a Wednesday, there was hell to pay. And I heard a lot of those phone calls. Or when people really got mad, they came up there. And I was like, ugh. They actually installed bulletproof glass at the Journal office. That's how mad people were getting. And so, you know, things like that, it just shows you the importance of journalism and why it matters to people, because people want to know what's happening in their communities. They want it from a reliable source. They want it from a trusted local face. And that's what newspapers can help provide. And that's why I love them too. Like I miss seeing my name in print all the time. But seeing what's happening to the industry is so disheartening. I mean, like, to me, the Register is the most important news institution in the state. Like, broadcast, online, anything, all of it, because the Register, for the moment, they still have the ability and the staff to do investigative pieces or long-term pieces that not everyone does, and we all need that. I mean, there's been plenty of my coverage, at Starting Line and smaller outlets that was based on an initial story that was broken by the Register. Like, okay, they got this big statewide investigation, maybe we can localize this a little bit more. And so, like, I dread the thought of us not being able to have that anymore. And so, like, I'm so grateful for you guys for being there still. Let's give them a round of applause. Like, and so, but like Erin said too, it is getting tougher and tougher to get access to officials. I mean, so I work for a left-leaning outlet. You know, everywhere else I worked at was conservative leaning, but it was a traditional print outlet, so that didn't matter. But even there, you would still have trouble getting access to officials. I mean, we'd find out the governor or Senator Ernst or somebody was in our coverage area in Northwest Iowa, you know, the most conservative, reddest district in the state, and we still wouldn't be able to get access. Or 2020 sucked for news. I mean, I remember we had, there was a COVID hotspot outbreak in Orange City, Iowa, and there was people with tents outside of a food processing facility, and everyone was turning to us like, what's going on? And we're like, we don't know. We only see the numbers. And so, you know, we reached out to the Iowa Department of Health trying to get some more information on this. We're trying. And we couldn't get any information. And eventually they told us we had to go to the governor's office to get any information at all. And I had to badger the governor's then press staffer for 3 consecutive days to get the slightest bit of information. And it took 3 days to get 2 sentences. And I can't even remember what the 2 sentences were because they were just so, they didn't mean anything. And it was right before print deadline too. So that lack of information, that lack of access is troubling because, you know, a lot of the times we have to pay attention to the things that you care about, but you may not have the bandwidth to pay attention to. That's what our job is. Like, I used to always tell people that my job is to go to these meetings, these school board meetings, these county supervisors meetings, these city council meetings, and listen to the boring stuff so you don't have to. And then I can tell you why your taxes are going up. And so, you know, having less access and then having less watchdogs, that is scary. I mean, in some of these communities, they're so not used to having a reporter cover their meetings anymore, that city officials, you know, they're like, what are you doing here when you come to a public meeting? It's like, it's a public meeting. This, what are we doing here? And so many folks, they're just not used to having those eyes on them anymore. And that's terrifying because I feel like every community deserves coverage. I mean, some of the most things I find most fascinating are what I like to call small town dramas. Like, if there's a small town in Iowa and there's shenanigans going on, I want in. Like, I enjoy doing that kind of stuff way more than going on the caucus trail or even the state house. Like, that is my jam right there. Like, small town drama, sign me up. And so, but being a digital outlet has been totally different for me. And then one of the things that's unique about Starting Line is that we are social first. And one of the big things we did this past year was put a lot more emphasis on TikTok because, okay, you know, a lot of outlets, we use social media to draw you to the website because that's where we get advertised and the page views, yada, yada, yada. Whereas like with us, our mission is just getting more information in front of people. And so by going on TikTok, that helped us reach a lot younger audience. And it helped us inform a lot more people who weren't paying attention to what was happening with the state government about what's happening there. You know, we got raw clips from legislative hearings. We got, you know, clips from floor speeches and things like that. And obviously use the caption to provide more context. But, you know, if you're able to tell the story of a legislative session and, you know, a lot of 60 to 90 second videos, it's a lot more interesting for some young people because they're not going to read that 2,000 word story. And some of them might not even read that 500 word story, but we still got to do those as well. So just kind of finding that interest and balance in how we cover things, especially with less access to officials and people, it's challenging. I mean, like everyone said, I hope it's a trend. I don't want it to be permanent. I would like to talk to the governor some more, but, you know, we'll see what happens.
Thank you all for that. So if you'll raise your hand, I will bring the microphone to you. We have a couple, 3 over here.
Thank you. Carol, I miss the opinion page every day in the Register. And not just because Connie Ryan had a great Any chance of that coming, say, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and then throw in Thursday?
Well, we already do Thursday. It's the one weekday. One thing I try not to do is to say things that I don't think I can actually come through on, and I don't foresee that anytime soon. I mean, it really is a resource question because we do our own research on those editorials. We don't just like sit down and pop off. I used to call them stare at your navel editorials. We try to do, instead of just leaning on the reporting staff all the time to do our own reporting for those editorials. And right now we have a one-person editorial operation. I actually started at the Register as an opinion editor, and I think the staff was 7 at that time. And we actually are looking for another editorial writer so that we'd have 2. And I think there might be a chance that we could get back to 3 days a week instead of 2. But that's probably the best hope right now.
So, Sheena Thomas here. Back in the day when I was a business owner, the advertising rates went up and up and up, and that made us stop. Now, I just want to ask, I was at a dinner last night and people were telling how much they paid for their subscriptions for the paper, and they're all over the map. And what do you say to that? What's the why? And yeah.
So, I mean, the print subscriptions are really pricey. They are. And, I can't say that I don't join you at times in questioning the wisdom of some decisions made above my pay grade. There's always been a fair amount of differentiation just based on come-on offers. Someone will say, oh, you can start the paper for only $10 a month, and then it bumps up after a few months, that kind of thing. But there was a company that did work for us that did all sorts of work on variable pricing. And it means that if you're over here, and some of it's based on distance, but not always, a variety of factors that say, oh, this household can pay more than this household, and pricing then became variable based on that. That's the explanation. I will say the digital subscription price is much more transparent. You still have the come-on deals, but it pretty much is once you're off the come-on deals, it's pretty much a set monthly price. And we're always preaching transparency in government, and I certainly appreciate that transparency in business.
I'll just add to that, and Carol, you'd know better than me on this, so correct me or add. But it just made me think the question I often also hear is, the paper is smaller, why am I paying more for it? And to my knowledge, a big factor in that is, just like everything else, the cost of doing business, the cost of the print paper has gone up over the years, the cost of ink has gone up over the years, and that's before inflation even. And so I mean, we don't have any really good answers that are gonna make people happy about the sticker shock of some of those print subscriptions at the end of the day, but we're also, believe me, we're not robbing anybody. We're running on lean budgets. We're doing the best we can with the resources we have. Is that about right? Yeah.
I'll also say one other thing that's been particularly difficult post-COVID is just getting the workforce to deliver the paper in a dependable manner. I mean, when you look at things, there are all sorts of reasons why digital makes a lot of sense. I mean, from an environmental standpoint, not sending trucks out to Sioux Center every day and all the gas and mileage and everything like that. So in that sense, that would be a good change. But I still get the paper delivered to my doorstep. I like that feel of being able to look through the paper. But getting people who are willing to, in the middle of the night, deliver your paper has become harder and harder. And usually when you hear businesses kind of griping about, how they can't afford it, get enough employees, you think, well, just give people a raise and you can get people. We've made it substantially more lucrative to deliver the paper and are still having lots of trouble with recruitment. That's why across much of Iowa, the paper's now delivered by mail. And that's one of the things that has just forced the press start really early. It's so that the paper can get to a post office, so it'll have same day delivery. It may be the middle of the afternoon, but at least the paper that says Tuesday, you'll get on Tuesday. The problem, it just seems like one problem leads to another, because the post office isn't what it once was either. And we're getting so many complaints that the paper that we get to the post office on Tuesday isn't getting to people until Wednesday or sometimes Thursday. So just that physical delivery of papers has become a difficult knot.
Robin Klein, thanks so much for all of that detail. I just want to say I'm really glad I live in the heart of Des Moines and not in Montana, where my friend there gets her Sunday Times in the mail on the following Friday. And just a note for the carriers, we have an excellent carrier who brings our New York Times and our Wall Street Journal and the Des Moines Register. It's the same, so I'm very aware of that type. But I am a huge news consumer. Obviously, I listen to IPR very much throughout the day. I read all of you frequently, sometimes online. And I just I hear your frustration with access to officials. As a consumer, I have the same frustration. And I appreciate that being reported. I appreciate it when you try, Ty, to dig into a story, and you kind of have to write this really short story saying, but we did not get a reply. I hear that same thing on IPR coverage. So I guess that's just more my comment. Just keep at it. But I would ask, if I write a letter to the editor complaining about things like that, will it get published?
About our delivery or about the access? Yes. I'll pile on a little bit here about access issues. I had the privilege this past year of serving as the state president of the Iowa Freedom of Information Council. It's sort of a rotational thing. Allison Smith, who's the news director at KCCI, is going to be the president this coming year, and a publisher out in Eastern Iowa will have it the following year. Randy Evans, who was a longtime editor for the Register, is its executive director, and it is doing terrific work in trying to keep public meetings open to the public and records open to the public. One of the things I'm trying to do more of is help that organization with some fundraising, because what we found is that we're more and more having to sue to get access to what are very clearly public records. And in fact, it was mentioned some of the COVID information. The Register wasn't part of this, but Laura Bellin from Bleeding Heartland, Iowa Capitol Dispatch was part of it, and the Freedom of Information Council sued the governor's office and actually won at the Iowa State Supreme Court level, despite all those Republican nominees on the court, saying that the governor's office had broken the the Iowa Public Records Act during that time period, and she's under an order for a year that at least that she has to, dot her I's a little bit more closely, her administration. I see this as a real threat to democracy that really needs the attention of the public.
I'll just add to that. I'm glad you pointed out that in the reporting that you've consumed, that it is pointed out when that happens. And I'm glad to hear that. I think we need to make sure, and I'm kind of now speaking to folks outside this room, but I'll just share with you that I hope we as reporters are all doing that, because it's important to note, and maybe there's a bygone era where that wasn't critical to note, that you reached out and they didn't get back to you, or they refused to do this kind of stuff. We're clearly not there anymore. We're at a point where, news consumers, readers, listeners, viewers need to know that we're making that effort, and the people on the other end aren't upholding their end of the bargain. And I'm just hopeful that, first of all, that just should be part of, us telling you all that we're doing our job, we're trying, but hopefully that can be a part of something that maybe gets this things turned back in the right direction, if enough people see that kind of thing and start talking to their folks about that. Do you have anything to add?
Yeah, one of my pet peeves with that one too is that you reach out to the people for comment, they don't say anything. The story comes out, they think they're painted in a bad light, and what do you think they're doing next? Then they're on social media bashing the story, calling it a hit piece or one-sided, all this kind of thing, and it's like, we tried to get you to talk on this. We tried to let you refute whatever this thing was said about you. You refused to do that, and now you're mad. And so, that's just one of those frustrations that goes along with that. And also, on the Freedom of Information Council, Randy Evans always wants to make sure people know it's open to anyone, because he wants more citizen requests, because he works with so many journalists and news organizations. So, yeah, wonderful organization. If you want if you want some information from a local, state government, he is the guy to talk to, and he can help you get that.
I want you to expand a little bit, especially Ty and Erin, on transparency and access, especially at the State House. We know that the Senate Republicans have limited your access. Talk a little bit about that and how that particularly impacts your ability to write a full story on whatever the topic may be. The governor rarely has a press conference. And so just talk about, and Carol chime in as well, but on the ground, doing the work day to day as a reporter at the State House, I see you there all the time. How does it impact your ability to do your work and write that full story?
So for the Senate Republicans, I think Aaron should give this since he's the president of the Capitol Bureau.
This I'm not familiar with this. Can you tell me more about it?
Yeah, do you want me to give you more details, Erin?
Yeah. So for anybody who might not be aware, really quick, the Iowa Capitol for literally a century and more has seating on the floor of both chambers where the media sits and reports on the goings on. In the COVID year, so I think it was 2021 was the first year that they did it. Obviously, during the COVID session, they did this. And then the following session, they started to make it more permanent. They put all reporters in the galleries. That very first year, we were fine with it because it was while the pandemic was still very much in the throes, and it made sense to spread people out that way. We were totally fine with it. Then they started coming back, and it started to look more permanent, especially on the Senate side, and it has become that. So after a literal century of reporters being right there on the floor, right next to the legislators, right next to the well where all the action happens, after being right down there, we are now seated in the gallery on the Senate side. The House has not moved us up stairs yet. And that's frustrating. And here's the toughest thing about it. We're still going to do our job. We're still going to report the story. And if we're doing it well, readers won't actually be able to notice. Because, you put a hurdle in front of us like that, it's a pain in the butt to me and to the other reporters, but it doesn't stop me from doing my job, right? So, thank you. So I think that's important to know. And the other thing I always like to point out is, and they can't do this, but God forbid if they ever even booted us out of the building. I said at the top that access is important. It is. I really believe it is. But at the same time, that doesn't stop you from doing your job either. And you mentioned Laura Bell, and she's a great example of that. And she's coming at things from an ideological perspective too. But that aside, her reporting is often fantastic, and she's hardly ever in the building. You can still cover government people, even if they're not sitting down in the room with you. Now, that said, it is a hurdle. It's a challenge. And the thing that, and I even tried to impress this upon them when we would discuss this with Senate Republican leaders, and we were asking for them to reconsider this policy, was that it's honestly, and I meant it, it wasn't just a pitch to try and get our seats back. It's a two-way street too. That's a beneficial way to have that working relationship when you're right there among them. And I can't tell you the number of times that I still, in an average day, will be working on a story and can just grab a lawmaker who's nearby or walking by and say, hey, help me understand what this bill does or what this amendment does, and it works both ways. We don't always catch anything. It's easy for them to just walk up to us and say, hey, did you see the subcommittee? I think we've got a really interesting one. Or even, hey, I saw your story yesterday. I didn't like the way this was. I encourage that too. I mean, if you got a complaint, I want to hear it and I want to work that out with you. So that's the biggest thing that it does. And I've gotten asked before, can you point to a story that you weren't able to do because of the new seating? And I say, I don't know that I can, and it's not about that. It's about just kind of corroding that, that arena, that working relationship. And I don't mean like in a friendship, but there's a working relationship that you build with these people that you're covering. And this corrodes at that, and it makes it harder to do. And I worry it impacts the quality of the work we're doing, because we're just not, down there and having that interaction the way we otherwise would.
I mean, there's some physical, nature to it in that it's very hard to hear up in the balcony. And, so you're trying to make sure that you get things right, and yet you can hardly hear what's going on. And then when you're trying to get that, make sure that you've got all perspectives represented, you're having to run down and try to catch them as they're going in and out kind of thing. And it does mean that sometimes there are just perspectives that are missing. And that's a disservice to Iowans.
I wonder, I miss some of the columnists you used to carry periodically, especially like Leonard Pitts and some people like that. And I'm just wondering if it's financially feasible, if you can't hire all your own editorial writers to, to engage some people on occasion more often that from other newspapers or other sources you could carry, a well-known or a good conservative and a well-known good progressive and both sides, but I don't know if that's feasible or not.
It does come down to money, and we've been, I feel like, scraping out the couch cushions for a while. Syndicated columnists like a Leonard Pitts or say a George Will on the conservative side. I mean, it's still X amount per column that you have to pay, and it adds up. And the way we look at it is that you still have access to those sources. You just have to go get them yourselves, from other papers and that sort of thing. What we really try to focus our local resources on is local reporting, local opinion, figuring, we don't in the print paper do that much of a national even news report anymore because there's so many places for that information. We want to spend every penny getting you news about the local community and about Iowa.
We have a question from online. Is there a way to feature from time to time siloed news to shed some light, extra light on it? You can't see much in a dark silo.
Make sure that I'm understanding the question. So just looking for perspectives from, the entire realm more. I guess that in my mind mostly applies to the opinion page. And we do try to carry some conservative columns as well as more progressive columns. We have in Sunday's section, we have a column about someone who is on the side of saying that the 3 college presidents were totally wrong and should be out of their jobs. And that's not something that I think our editorial board would align with, but it's part of trying to share a broad spectrum of opinions. It's become more and more difficult, I think ethically, even when you're dealing with opinion, you still need to try to vet opinions to see that if the facts within those opinions are still accurate, and even, as open-minded as I am about First Amendment expressions, there is, I think, some limit about what we would want to publish in the Des Moines Register, what is responsible opinion. And believe me, over the years, maybe even many of you have thought we got that call wrong. As you're trying to make sure that all viewpoints are represented, have we gone on the right or on the left too far and published something irresponsible? Sometimes we probably have.
Okay, to go back to Carol's comment, isn't there still a lot of information that we don't know related to what happened with COVID in Iowa? And then to go into the future, there seems to me like there's a ton of stuff that we don't know about the state finances right now regarding public schools and a whole lot of other things. And how do we dig into that, and how do we flesh some of that out? Thank you for what you're doing.
I think mostly we keep doing what we try to do. I do think you raised good points about public health in Iowa. And what did we learn from how ill-prepared we were the last time around to prepare for the next virus? We have one health reporter now. I could use 3 or 4. So it's trying to make wise choices about, trying to make sure important questions like that are covered. I'm sure the Gazette's Bureau and ours will do a lot about overall finances this session. It certainly looks like the Republicans are looking at yet another tax cut. And at what point are you then cutting services so much that you're seeing a real deterioration in quality? Some of those are subjective questions. I think some are objective ones where we can dig out data. We'll certainly try.
Yeah, that's well said. To the question about the state's finances, some of it is just based on projections, right? So all we can do is ask the questions, and we have some data. The Revenue Estimating Conference, in fact, just met yesterday, the day before. The times a social construct. So we have some data about the impact that the current tax cuts are already having, and we see that. And as Carol said, it sounds like there's every indication they're going to become even more aggressive with that. And so there is math to be done that we can point to, and then ask the questions. Okay, so if there's going to be less money, then what does that change as far as how you're spending and what services get funded? And we often point out that the biggest pieces of the pie, because there's some little things you can talk about that don't really move the needle, and the biggest pieces of the pie are public education, Medicaid, and then public safety is another big one, and infrastructure, obviously. So where do those reductions start to come? To this point, we continue to get the answer that they're not going to have to do that the revenues will offset themselves and that there won't be less money to spend. But we're already seeing an indication that is not necessarily true. And as I said, that's the cuts are currently employed. And as I said, that we're every indication that that's only going to be accelerated. So there are huge questions to ask, and we have to get them on the record. But that's a tougher one because it's kind of you can't prove what's going to happen down the road. All you can do is say, okay, what are you telling us is going to happen? What can you promise is or isn't going to happen? If you're going to do this, what are you going to have to do in the future? And put them on the record for what they tell us.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be a lot of following the money. That's basically how we're going to figure out what's happening with private school, with the private school vouchers and with public school financing. I mean, because whenever you see the Iowa Department of Education release the latest stats on how many students are receiving the vouchers and things like that, they never say how much it is. So you always got to do the math. You're like, okay, we got 18,000 plus enrolled. They're getting this much, times that by each other, and that's how much we're spending on that. And the initial estimates of that have been they were way lower during the session. And as we saw, the numbers are way higher than what they projected. And so, that's an item in the budget that doesn't have it's an unlimited line item. So, that's going to be a fascinating thing to pay attention to. And it's going to be a little bit harder to get information out there since it's got to get more information on it besides just the raw numbers because of the third party vendor and all that jazz. And then even the auditor, the state's office, they changed how that office is able to access records and things like that. If you talk to Rob Sand, he'll tell you all about it. And so, our jobs are getting a little bit harder, but again, we find ways to adjust and adapt. I mean, that's just what we do. You throw a challenge in front of us and we're like, all right, well, we'll figure something else out. I mean, that's what we've always done in news, and we're not going to let anything deter us from telling these stories.
I think some of the coverage of state government is a place where you see just the product of lack of numbers. I mean, I'm not sure exactly how many people the Register had covering the State House 20 years ago. And we've really worked hard to maintain state coverage. We have 2 State House reporters and 4 on the politics team. But to me, what's really missing is we used to have a lot more reporters who covered just state government as a whole, covered the agencies. So they'd cover the Department of Corrections, and they would cover the Department of Natural Resources, and doing a lot with the Department of Human Services, Health and Human Services, which has such a broad portfolio, everything from Medicaid to child welfare to foster children. So many things that really impact people's lives, and we don't really cover those agencies much anymore. So I'll make one pitch here. I think that one direction that even profitable for-profit news organizations like Lee Newspapers or Gannett will do in the future for our newsrooms is to try to have a nonprofit arm that will help fund some of the reporting. The Seattle Times has kind of been on the vanguard of this. For example, they did a fundraiser to set up a 5-person investigative team just to look into the homeless problem in Seattle. Funded an editor, a photographer, and 3 reporters. I've had the very babyest preliminary talks with like the Community Foundation. You know, could we look at a major issue facing our community? Homelessness could be one, and say, let's do some fundraising and let's set up a team of reporters to really do in-depth reporting on this. So that might be part of the model in the future.
Yeah. Just really quick, because I don't want to take up too much of the time left. At Gazette, we're having similar conversations about something similar at the Gazette. So it's not all bad news up here. The one thing I will say on this more broadly is there aren't as many State House reporters as there were, and I agree that agencies is maybe a blind spot too. But comparatively speaking, you can feel good that Iowa does have a pretty solid State House press corps, especially comparing to other states. I've talked to national organizations, and there's been stories reporting done on the decline in State House reporters across the country. And I was part of a group that I don't even remember now off the top of my head, and they were looking at how that's been declining, and then in the period that they were looking at, Iowa's number of State House reporters actually went up. So again, it's not what it used to be. We'd love to see more, but we do have a pretty decent number there of people who are at the State House every day, and it's a pretty good diverse group of outlets as well. So that is the one thing that I am proud of, and can tell y'all that you can feel some solace of comfort in there, that you got a team up there keeping eyes and ears on the State House. Yeah.
Go ahead. Yeah, and the on the ground camaraderie of the everyone at the State House, like all the reporters, is fantastic. Like last year was my first time covering it in person. The year before I covered it remotely because I was still living in Sioux City. And so like, you know, Erin and everyone else was just like very helpful, like, you know, helped me find my way around the building, you know, learning what's important, what's not important, you know, sharing information. Like, for example, if we all know this one person gave a really good quote during the hearing, whoever got the name, they just shares it with everyone else, because like, what's the point of like trying to gatekeep a name when it's going to be easy for the other person to find out? Like, so we would do little things like that to help each other out, because at the end of the day, we all want to help Iowans stay informed about what's happening in their state government.
So I have a quick question. What I want to know is, there was a recently a campaign advertisement, I think I saw it yesterday, about Kim Reynolds endorsing Donald Trump, and it was from a long time ago. And you know, and then people are seeing an endorsement by Governor Reynolds of DeSantis. How do you explain that to people? I mean, I don't get it.
I mean, basically, I think my headline was Donald Trump continues to troll Kim Reynolds, because that's literally just what he's doing. I mean, he has not been happy that she endorsed DeSantis, and he was unhappy even like over the summer. We were hearing murmurs about this leaking out. And so like, he's just going full on attack on her. And so, we make sure I always make sure to clarify that, hey, she endorsed DeSantis, and Trump is just, retaliating, the way he does because, it's a giant man child.
Yeah, it speaks to a larger problem, in increasing problem and a challenge that we face, in covering some of these candidates. And look, I'm not picking any winning or losing teams here by acknowledging that there's one that does it more than most of the others right now. And covering an event with former President Trump is very unique in that way, that there's just very little that he says anymore that you don't have to, at the very least, provide some context to, if not entirely point out that it's just not accurate. So that's a newer thing in these last 8 years since he burst onto the scene, and he's not the only one who does it. He just probably does it a little more than the others. But that speaks to the responsibility that we have, and doing that without crossing over a line into actually advocating for a candidate, whatever that looks like. But I have no problem with whoever it is. And I've got angry phone calls and emails the day after a number of stories, including very recently that I won't go into detail on. Sorry, to protect the, I don't know, innocent might be a strong word, but look, if you've got the facts to back yourself up, and you've done your due diligence, it's not we're not playing a game. We're not trying to play get you in our reporting. We're not trying to make you look bad. We have a job to do to pass along what our candidates and government officials are doing and saying. And if they're saying something misleading, it's our job to point that out. And that work has become an increasing percentage of the overall work of putting together a story these days. But I don't shy away from it either. I feel a solemn responsibility to do that.
I'm going to end us there. I know there are lots of hands up, but help me to thank our panel, please. I think it's a good place to end on. You continue to do your work regardless, and we are grateful to each of you and to all the news outlets in Iowa that continue to do the hard work. And so I am grateful for that. I'm grateful for each of you for being here. We will be back here January 19th with Mike Owens talking about tax cuts and transparency and finance in the state government and all of that. So I hope you will return. If you will take care of the things that are on your table that you used and throw them away, that would be awesome. Certainly take the little toy with you that was in your bag if you got that. So, and we will see you after the, pardon?
Thank you, everybody, for having us.
And if you want a corn butter, if you didn't know what they were in the bucket over there, please take 20 of them. So we've had them for years, so we're just trying to get rid of them. Have a great New Year. Thank you.